Hello, and welcome back to my rather exhaustive Superman review here. We are now into essentially the 90s. We're starting in like 89 here, but we are talking about the 90s in this video. Starting with Superboy. This is a show that I don't think is on many people's radar. It is it's about a younger Superman with different versions of classic Superman tropes. So, like, instead of journalists, they're journalism students. Instead of later in the series, instead of a newspaper, Superboy is able to get close to stories through a bureau called like the Department of Extra Normal Matters. And so, yeah, they're basically just doing like Superman stuff with Superboy. Like, so they start the series with him in college, as a journalism student, but they like try to make him more like less of a student, less of a boy as time goes on. So they even have Superboy as like a more Superboy, just a weird way to say it, at the beginning of the series, and then even with the actor, they make him more Superman-y. So they're clearly trying to do that. But let's get into details. A lot of what defines this show is the shifting priorities and shifting actors. Okay, particularly with the move from season 1 to season 2. There's 4 seasons in this show. We start with a guy called John Himes Newton. And so he plays Superboy in season 1, and he's my favorite of the 2 actors that they get to play Superboy. He brings a brashness to the character, and it's like I want, if you're gonna do Superboy and try to do something beyond just doing like just trying to be like, oh, he's younger, so it appeals to younger people, which is what I feel like often happens. You kind of want to make him a different character. So brashness will befit a Superboy. Who they get to play 2 through 4 is Gerard Christopher, who is a dead ringer for a young Christopher Reeve in many ways. He went more of an earnest route, which works for trying to have a young Superman. Like, he's already totally virtuous, and they lean into that more as time goes by. But I certainly in season 2, and I think even overall, I think he's the weaker actor between the 2. But ironically, I actually like the writing on the show is stronger on average after he comes in, but I don't think that has anything to do with him. So kind of in addition to having Superboy instead of Superman, we have Lana. Stacy Haiduk plays Lana. She is the only one to stay throughout the whole show. Kind of crazy. I'm going to go into some other people who did not do that, and props for that. It's believable when watching Haiduk that this would have been Annette O'Toole from Superman 3 as a college student, because she's similar, but she's just kind of more rebellious in her demeanor overall. So there are 2 different Jimmy Olsens, and this is also a change that gets made at the end of season 1. You have James Calvert playing T.J. White, and then they instead of recasting the character T.J. White, they just give a new character. Like TJ like moves away, and then you have Elon Mitchell Smith playing Andy McAllister. And aside from being stand-ins to Jimmy Olsen, there's just not a whole lot more to them. Lex Luthor is played by Scott James Wells in the first season, and then Sherman Howard after that. Scott James Wells, because they're having this in college, he's just a jock bully. Like, that's just the role that he plays in this setting. He's got a letter jacket, and he's doing crap like rigging basketball games and just stealing jewels, but the jewels are already at the university. So he's really, really small time at the beginning. But he gets right at the end of season 1, the 26th episode, Luthor Unleashed, he gets a huge boost, turns into an arms dealer, develops an actual hatred for Superboy, and they write off his recasting by burning his face, and then they have him go through plastic surgery. And by the way, they don't have an explanation for why Superboy's face changes. They're like, we can't write that off. It's just don't pay attention. Don't pay attention. It's fine. Sherman Howard, the second Lex Luthor, this man is absolutely bonkers. He's got the hugest mouth in existence, and he's always like maniacally cackling while doing one of his schemes. And he's insane. He's insane. He would be a lower Luthor, but again, and obviously you've seen so far with me that humor does not save something. But it's still pretty good. I still have to give it props for at least doing that. So yeah, I give them a lot of points for forging ahead, even though they lost 3 of their 4 leading people, including the lead guy at the end of the first season. So it's a good thing. It's a good thing for that. And I'm going to go into some other actors and characters as I get to them, because we're really getting some definitive characters here in a way that we have not before. And even in a more general sense, this show is next level as far as sheer creativity and number of ideas. Even more so than Christopher Reeve's show, even though that had more seasons. So, and there are some real efforts to reach the high points of Superman 2. Does it do it? Probably not, but we still get episodes that like reach that approach that. Like there's especially to parallelize it to Superman 2. We have a 2-parter story, 2 episodes, Abandoned Earth and Escape to Earth, which is a 2-parter about meeting Jor-El and Lara, and Clark has to grapple with those 2 identities and homes, as he does in Superman 2. So, let's look at some standout episodes. We have Roads Not Taken, which is an Injustice Justice Lord storyline with a dictator Superboy and a Superboy who murdered Lex. Not the same Superboy. So there are 2 alternate Superboys. And so they're 2 alternate evil versions, except it is a bit more complicated. And I'll keep quiet about it because I do recommend watching this show. That episode is really good. Mindscape, where Superboy gets put into a state where he's having nightmares. So basically the opposite of a Black Mercy, which we will see explicitly in future properties. Black Mercy is basically just a an alien that attaches to your chest and puts you in a state of living your greatest fantasy. So it traps you, benignly traps you by doing that. Superboy Lost, one of the best episodes of the show. He gets amnesia because he flies up and hits his head and stopping a meteor. This happens a few times in Superman's history. And without regaining his memory, he finds a family. He meets his family and gets attached to them really quickly and then protects them from harm. So he's just rediscovering his innate need to be there for people he cares about. Again, even though he did not get his memories. There is an episode called The Golem, which is not Lord of the Rings Golem. In fact, I'm going to say Golem, even though I think Golem is correct. And kind of similar to what I was saying at the beginning of this review, Superman has... I mean, let's be real. He's kind of a golem in concept. He is created by Jewish writers, and he is a method of overcoming otherwise insurmountable dangers towards just people in general. But he's kind of a protector that's just like an auto win. That's pretty golemish. Know Thine Enemy, which is a great deep dive into Lex's past, where we learn he cared for his sister Lena when he was young. So we get a bit of humanity for this crazed maniacal Luthor here, which it was especially interesting to see this relationship in a different way from the Supergirl TV show, which, as I will describe, I had seen the first 2 seasons of before I started this whole review. So that kind of contrast was interesting to see. There's the 6th episode of season 4 has Noelle Neal in it as a woman named Alexis. I forget what her whole thing was, but that's who she played. And then it's probably not the amnesia one. This is the best episode. Mind Games. M-I-N-E Games. Season 3, episode 22. Luthor and Superboy both get trapped in a mine, and they have to work together to escape. It's a great premise, wonderful heart-to-heart. It really sounded very natural. There is a good amount of hokiness in this show, and this definitely was not one of those moments. So you have kind of this ideological battle of sorts with Lex going off about the selfishness of humankind and the exclusive joy that power can bring, and then Superboy countering with his belief in helping people and sort of a championing of the ordinary lifestyle. And then he asks him, well, okay, no, yeah, so you like helping people, I get it, but what do you want for yourself? And Superboy says, the freedom to compromise. I think that's really powerful because it's like, my sense is that he doesn't have the freedom to compromise because he is so singular in what he can do, the danger that he can present. It's a very good Superman sort of moment. Yeah. I said I was going to get to some of the other actors, and so I should do that. I talked about, when I was doing Superman 3, and I was talking about Richard Pryor, I thought that he worked, and I said that I would talk about a comedian that did not. It's in this show. His name is Michael J. Pollard. I am 92% sure that he's actually a comedian outside of the show. And he plays Mr. Mxyzptlk, the first real appearance of Mxyzptlk. And he is grating. He's great. This is one of those performances where, like, it feels ad-libbed and it's just not funny. But he thinks he's funny and that he can pull off the role just by running his mouth. Like, oh, yeah, I'm automatically funny and I'm just going to keep talking fast. Hey, how you doing? Yada, yada, yada. I hate it. I hate it. Now, funnily enough, Gilbert Gottfried does appear in this, and he will play Mxyzptlk in the animated series in a few years from this. And he's just like a sort of nameless bad guy for one of the episodes. He's like a genius with electronics. That's his whole thing, but it's still kind of cool. We also get our first John Corbin in this, Metallo. And that's played by Roger Corbin. Michael Callan. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, he's the stocky one. I don't think, yeah, now that I'm remembering, I don't think I've seen a Metallo iteration that enjoys what he does more. But again, yeah, you had Lex. Superboy has a lot of performances like that. It's pretty funny. Douglas Myers plays Bizarro. And oddly enough, this is one of the more tragic Bizarros. They go with a scaled down version of Frankenstein's monster, essentially, where it's more about having a mate. It's like, because he immediately goes after Lana, right? But he recurs, and he does eventually get a bride, but she's unstable and she dies a year after they get together. And so he's like, oh, the same thing's going to happen to me. And there's a procedure by which he turns human. But then he has to make some difficult decisions about remaining human or doing the right thing. And I'm going to be coy about that. Yeah. Yeah. I like this show. I really do. But I have to be real. It is so-so compared to everything else. Its high points and entertainment value are like balanced out by hit or miss storylines, and there's not much community in the cast because, again, you're changing characters all the freaking time. So yeah, this is right. This is the first C. It's right smack dab in the middle. Yeah. So I'm actually going to turn this off. I unfortunately have no control over how that locks. It's a work computer. If you couldn't read what it said on there, it says "Look to the stars." It's beautiful. It's a beautiful piece of art. I wish I could credit it. Anyway, Lois and Clark: The New Adventures of Superman. So this is an extended rom-com. Hate the message, not the messenger. That's what it is. It's their love story. I mean, that's the through line of the show. And then Superman is in there too. He's I do think that he is secondary in this show. But he's complete with like iconic villains and by now somewhat comfortable storylines like discovering and grappling with Kryptonian heritage, stuff like that. Actors, Superman, played by Dean Cain, one of the best Clark Kents ever. I'll go on tentative record saying the best, actually. But he is not a good Superman. He doesn't have that presence that I keep talking about. He just looks like Clark trying to be stern. Oh, you shouldn't do that, my friend. Anyway, Terry Hatcher playing Lois Lane here. One of the best Lois Lanes. Not as sure to say the best. But, I mean, yeah, she's got the hair and the pantsuit. Super 90s. But that's good because the whole show is so 90s. This when I said that I was going to talk about the 90s, all these shows take place in the 90s, but this is the one that is like the least of surprise that it does. And so I would also say that this is the best pairing of Lois and Clark, which, you would hope it would be up there if it's the title of the show and what they're trying to get at. There is a combination. There's another recasting in this show of Jimmy, starting with Michael Landis in the first season, and then for the seasons 2 through 4, sounding familiar, is Justin Whalen. I had said before that it's difficult to compare Jimmy Olsen's, and that's true, but that doesn't mean, kind of individually one to another. But there is a trajectory of growth with Jimmy, and I would say that this is the beginning of, his long-awaited fleshing out. And it really starts with Whalen. Landis does a good job. Don't get me wrong. He's actually really good. But they give Whalen, plot things to work with. He has a sketchy job past. There's an episode where he's revealed to be a sleeper assassin, and most importantly, has an episode with his dad, who abandoned him because he's a spy, and then the dad has to decide what to do when Jimmy gets involved in his shit. It's good. It's good. And then Lane Smith plays Perry White. He's the best Perry. I feel comfortable saying that. John Hamilton, again. But even though Lane Smith never exactly screams out of control, he still comes across as an old grump that nevertheless has plenty of softy moments. And he's just as likely as not to calmly explain himself versus lose his temper. Lex Luthor, played by John Shea. This is the most polished Luthor we've gotten so far, and so it's a huge pendulum swing from Sherman Howard in Superboy. If I were to rank the Lex Luthors, he would probably be smack dab in the middle. He is a great portrayal. Has that poise, is dapper, but there are others that are a little more complex than he is. So yeah, straight down the middle again. Eddie Jones and Kay Callan playing Pa and Ma Kent. I have said Pa and Ma Kents before. I have mentioned those actors' names and talked about how they've been changing with them from Eben to Jonathan Kent and stuff like that. But this is another level. I'm devoting a whole thing to them here because this is the first time that I felt real compassion for them. They are so present in Clark's life that apparently they appear in just as many episodes as he does which is presumably all of them. And it's not that big of a surprise. They're always on the phone with him or visiting his house. And they themselves are such clearly compassionate people. They're definitely my favorite parents of a full-grown Superman. I say that very specifically, very intentionally. There is a character that I have to bring up called Tempest, who's played by Lane Davies, and a very unlikely major villain who shows up, I think, 5 times. He's got a silly name, silly clothes, and no power except how to operate a time machine, but somehow it still works. He has a great moment where he reveals Superman's identity to Lois and just tears her to shreds for being so stupid. And then in season 4, he puts a curse on any attempted consummation between Lois and Clark. So he is just dedicated to being a cockblock. And then Howie Mandel plays Mxyzptlk. He's an interesting design. He seems like the old master from Doctor Who. And his big thing that he does is he basically Groundhog Days Metropolis and tries to drain everyone's hope. And that's like Disney evil. Jack Larson is back. He plays he just plays an artificially aged Jimmy Olsen. And Phyllis Coates plays Ellen Lane for one episode. And then they shockingly had Deathstroke in here somewhere too. Metallo, played by Scott Valentine, called Johnny. He's really just a douchebag in this. And then we have Red Kryptonite making I think its first appearance as Red Kryptonite. And this makes Superman apathetic. That's what it specifically does in this one. Yeah. Again, the show breathes 90s, and I think that's a good thing. Metropolis just comes alive. And actually, this may be a good time to point out a certain benefit that someone can get from a Superman versus a Batman watch. See, not this watch, like a TV show movie watch. See, once you get to the darker Batman, so after Adam West and the early comics and stuff, once you get to 1989, Gotham is really a city and aesthetic frozen in time. Or I guess you could call it timeless. There are some variations, but really think about the difference in the setting between the 1989 Tim Burton movie and the latest movie in 2022, putting aside minor tweaks in directorial style. There's not really that much difference. But watching Superman means traveling through the decades in which he's existed, because his setting doesn't need to reflect his character in the same way. So you had 40s and 50s, these guys. And then you got the 90s here. Smallville is going to be super 2000s. So I just think that's an interesting aspect of going through his history. Yeah. So, yeah, again, it's in essence an extended rom-com with superhero crime-fighting overtures. But it works. I think it works. So much of the recap of the seasons here will be from that lens. And also, just a note, these TV entries in general are also going to start being more spoilery because we are starting to get series long storylines, versus something back like with George Reeves where it's just the problem of the day. There's not really a continuing thing there. Season 1, so we're getting to know the characters. And everything like that. It ends with, and I'm going to kind of focus on how the love story is developing, right? So it ends with Lex almost marrying Lois because they're, getting together. Clark at first tells Lois he loves her, but she loves Superman. It's a familiar story. Then, after the threat of Lex passes, Lois comes to love Clark instead, but Clark lies that he was lying about loving her before she can tell him her feelings. And I implore you to get used to the will they, won't they, and get used to easily avoided misunderstandings. So then the threat of Lex passes because he dies. He is by far most present in season 1. They do some weird stuff with resurrection later. But he dies because the actor leaves the show. I think this is the one where he commuted from literally the other side of the country and they wouldn't make proper accommodations. He probably negotiated for a higher salary or compensation or something. I have no idea. But anyway, he leaves the show. He's dead. Someone stole his body. Of course, the very moment when Clark asks Lois out and we start to get somewhere there, the doctor who stole Lex's body pulls the trigger and brings him back from the dead. And again, this keeps happening with other emergencies. And I know I probably seem a little annoyed when I talk about this, but that's just part of the game, right? I'm not saying it as a knock on the show. I'm saying it as sort of like oh gosh, we're doing this again. Just so you know. Or Lois tries to tell her feelings for Clark again, but emergencies keep calling Superman away. So someone who asked her out earlier in the episode, she goes up to them and like, yeah, I'll go out with you. Yeah. Just kind of as a stick it to him sort of thing. Even though the emergencies keep happening at inopportune times, she ditches Superman and the other guy to profess to Clark. So they still do move forward and start dating. But it happens in such a way that doesn't feel forced, even though looking back on it, I'm like, okay, so why are you ditching these other people? I guess you just feel this draw and nothing is going to actually stop that. Yeah. So then the end of this season, Clark proposes to her without telling her his secret, but she's already figured it out because vibes? Season 3. It takes several episodes into the season for Lois to accept Clark's proposal, and then we have to have suspense for the wedding to happen. And now Clark can, so he can use the danger of being around Superman as justification to break up. Admittedly, some of the back and forth doesn't make sense because, okay, so they'll be apart for some reason, right? And then they get back together because of some change in their relationship. But that change often has nothing to do with the reason they broke up. So that actually is a bit of a criticism. It's like, can't you have some continuity there? Then they do get married, and it's a clone who eats frogs. This leads to quite a sequence of 5 episodes of all that getting sorted out, and it involves amnesia. A lot of it. Okay, but I do need to talk about how season 3 ends, though. There's another identity grappling storyline involving previously unknown Kryptonians. Without going into details, Superman has to leave Earth, and he doesn't know if he'll ever come back. And he decides to leave publicly. It sounds silly, but the amount of sad I got, I don't think I cried, but I definitely felt empty. And that is what is supposed to happen when you threaten to break up the Daily Planet family. The sense of community in this show is off the charts. Off the charts. And season 4. Marriage, finally, in episode 3. So now that that's all over and done with, the agonizing moments really do slow to a trickle. The one point remaining, baby. The series ends with a baby being left on their doorstep, with a note that it's theirs after it's been established that they can't have kids. And it doesn't bother me that much, but especially because of the typical music that's been throughout the entire series that goes... I don't know, the music that would accompany sitcoms in the 90s. It's like, oh gosh, now it's a baby. It's the 90s, so that's what comes next in the only lifestyle possible. Okay. No, real talk, okay? This show had so much. It's one of the best Loises and best Clarks, the best supporting cast, and one of the best stories in the sense that it kept focus on an element of Superman and draped it in a great atmosphere. It's that, yeah, this is one of the absolute best ones for sure. Y'all, fellas, I think a lot of you were waiting for this one. This is the 90s. This is the 90s show. So for context, keep in mind that the last anything that we had that was meant to focus on Superman was Superman 4. So this could have been only okay, and it would have, bumped it up quite a bit, just because that was the last that we had. It's not just okay. So, yeah. I'll admit, this one is a bit difficult for me, because I grew up on it, as many of you may have as well. The aesthetic and storylines, one in particular that I'll get into, had a huge formative impact on me. So that'll definitely become clear. I have to mention that because we've gone through a lot of animated series here. You got this one, and this one, and this one, and obviously we have not gotten much quality animated series in all senses. Like, Fleischer had good animation, and these are also there. But in terms of Fleischer's animation, very famously, Bruce Timm, as an animator and as like a showrunner of sorts, is responsible for the DC animated universe in this era. And I saw in going over this that he looked at Max Fleischer's work here and was like, yeah, I can't improve on that. I have to do my own thing. I have to make a totally different looking animation. I'm not touching that work. It's a fool's errand. So I think that was a kind of cool bit of respect and I think it's warranted in terms of the visual component of the show. Superman, Tim Daly. This is Superman's voice. I don't know, like, what's a comparison I can make, like, yeah, okay, so let's say I was making a tier list of liquids, and you're asking me to rank water. Like, yeah, maybe other liquids are cooler and or more explosive or whatever, I don't know. But water is just like, it's the liquid. Like, what do you want from me? So that's kind of how I view him. So he's iconic. He's wonderful. Not much more I can say. And in many ways, I can say the same thing about Lois, Dana Delaney. But I do think of her slightly differently. She's the baseline. She's who I was thinking of as I was going through all these Lois lanes and being like, yeah, she's the one to beat. And Terry Hatcher was, in different ways, the only one who was beating her. She's driven, sarcastic, and I expected her not to be dethroned. But you have Terry Hatcher as a contender, and there is one that will be upcoming. Let's see. Yeah, Lex. Clancy Brown. Best Luthor? Probably. His voice, so smooth, cold, calculating, smug. And then, plus, this is the first time I'm going to be doing this, it's not the last, I'm going to talk about the Justice League cartoon, which is intimately tied into this show. I'm going to do my best to keep it aside, but I'm not always going to be able to do it. He does get a lot of extra development and depth in Justice League. Lex Luthor does. And yeah, I mean, he's great even so. Even without that, but I just got to mention it. Darkseid is like the villain here. And what a get. What a get. Michael Ironside. Menacing. Wonderful voice. Wonderful. And let's see. David Kaufman plays Jimmy. Not much to say about him. He's a Jimmy. Victor Brandt as Professor Hamilton, who I'll start talking about more as he gets more attention in this stuff. Corey Burton as Brainiac. George Dunza as Perry, who's kind of a nothing burger. But Malcolm McDowell as Metallo. That's pretty cool. And Jolie Fisher as Lana. So nothing really about the voice. The voice is whatever. But as far as Lana, the character, this was obviously my first experience with Lana. And this is what inured me from Superman 3's depiction of a sweet girl next door, which I wanted to be fair and say that in many ways it is the ultimate Lana depiction, but it's not my choice of Lana. Lana should be sneaky, morally dubious, a contrast to Lois, because Lois is righteous in her own way. She has a cause which makes her a better match for Clark. Like, there's a reason why he goes to her. Lana's just like a first girl. So yeah, don't just, make her own sort of just sweet nothing. Give her some sneakiness and doubtfulness. That's my view on it anyway. Gilbert Gottfried, yes. This is easily the most iconic Mxyzptlk. I'm partial to him. I can see, like I mentioned that other guy was grating. I can see how people would find Gottfried grating because it is his voice. But I don't think so. It's what I started with. So how much can you do? With a degree of objectivity, though, this character honestly was always begging to be animated because his power is just fuckery. Just toon force out the wazoo. Kent's, there's, to the voice actors, nothing on them. They don't have anything to do. There are no meaty scenes for them. So, a couple of other minor voices. Tony J plays Sylvan, who is Kal-El's maternal grandfather. And that actor also appeared in Lois and Clark, I forget who. Ursa from Superman 2, so the female Kryptonian, Sarah Douglas, is basically her analog, like Ursa's analog in this show. Her name's Mala, but she's Ursa. So, Brainiac, right. This show introduced the idea that Brainiac came from Krypton. So, I spent a long time, before my research for this, essentially, thinking it was always the case. The Supergirl TV show most overtly puts the status quo back in place. But there are other ones that do it as well. Is it a better origin or is it not? The effect of Brainiac's contribution to Krypton's destruction does kind of dilute the responsibility of Krypton's leaders somewhat, but I still don't consider it a miss as a choice. Like, it does offer its own advantages, like being just kind of more personal for Superman, a more personal enemy. He would feel a degree of responsibility for Brainiac that he wouldn't otherwise. So I don't think that's so bad. Intro theme. I have not been talking about music. Hasn't been a lot to say. John Williams, come on, that's my favorite. I'm not obligated to be original, guys. Okay, I just got to be straightforward. But this theme is lit. It's the dun-dun-dun, 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 dun-dun-dun-dun. It's composed by Shirley Walker, and it was my second favorite for a long time. It is now my third, and I will get to my second later. The episode counts per season, again, all three of these shows that I'm talking about in this video have 4 seasons, oddly enough. But for this one, it's kind of fake because the episode counts are really inconsistent. They set a precedent for the first season with 13 episodes. Okay, second season 28, basically double. Then the third season is 10 episodes, and then the fourth is 3. And I'll get into a little more about those 3 episodes. But yeah, it's almost as though they kind of wanted to do the 3 episodes as part of the third season, but then they didn't. But it does work because of what a couple of those episodes are. So obviously, I'm not done talking about this, first of all, but obviously it's going to be in this area. It's definitely going to be. But the one trouble with it is that it's most of the episodes are kind of contained. Like they want to introduce Superman into this larger universe. So there's a lot of like, here's this villain, here's this villain, here's this villain. And I like that, but it does mean that they're building the world really fast. So Superman does get a bit left behind compared to other properties that explore him a bit more. Not that he doesn't get explored, because he does, but there's a big chunk of the show where he's not. So that does hurt it a bit. And plus, it made me really confused when all the other shows weren't like this one, in the sense that most of the episodes are major villain centered. I'm like, where are the other major villains? Looking at George Reeves, what the heck? It's just some random dudes. Where's Brainiac? Where's everyone? And I guess they didn't feel comfortable, even if those guys existed, they didn't feel comfortable bringing them in en masse. So, okay. So standout episodes, because this is what I still have to talk about. Brave New Metropolis, which is this show's dictator storyline. And so Lois goes to another dimension and finds Superman as a dictator. And, as it often does, it's triggered by Lois dying, or that universe's Lois dying. But he also is teaming up with Lex, which is new. And if I remember correctly, Lois rehabilitates Superman in her brief time there. Monkey Fun, which is the chimp who made it big from the 60s, which obviously no, you're not forgetting. I did not talk about that. That episode, but I just saw that it was just like a retelling of that one, so I think that's kind of cool. World's Finest kicks off the whole Justice League shebang, brings Batman in. It's a really solid story. It's a good episode. Bizarro's World, which is not the introduction of this property's Bizarro, I don't think, because if I remember right, his introduction is a little more standard. But Bizarro's World is really good because he essentially turns Metropolis into Krypton in order to destroy it. That premise is kind of heavy. Just like the sense that, because he wants to find meaning as Superman, and he's like, okay, in order to be Superman, my home has to be destroyed. I did not realize that when I was a kid. I did a bit of a rewatch, and I was kind of scared of that whole premise. Seriously. So yeah. Okay. And we are in season 2 now, I believe. Yeah, this is in season 2. Apocalypse Now. So that's the name of Darkseid's world is Apocalypse, and then it's ... now! Exclamation point. And I love that they have a ... in there, because they're almost like, hey, guess where this is going? Now. Hey, you get it? Apocalypse Now, right? Right? So this is a, are they both called Apocalypse Now, or is the second episode? I'm not sure. But, God, how do I begin to talk about this second episode? Dan Turpin, the police chief who is a recurring character, and he dies. Like, he dies. The shock. I'm like, no, that's not allowed. You can't do that. It can't be. And then they have a funeral scene. Like, no. In case you missed it, this happened. And to be fair, like, he gets like lasered into like into smoke. So it's like, oh, maybe he did get transported. So maybe they had to have a funeral to be like, and with very particular tone to be like, you're not seeing things. This is where we're going with this. I learned during research that apparently it's a Jewish funeral service, which I didn't realize at the time, but is awesome. And that last line that Superman says, in the end, the world didn't need a Superman, just a brave one. And then you see, they had the audacity to follow it up with an end title card that says, not the end. Like, what does that mean? I know to be continued. I've seen to be continued in like every show that I've ever seen. I know what that means. We just have to tune in next week and we'll see it. But instead, they said not the end, and then they just... The next episode, in like the beginning episode of season 3, was like a normal episode. Like nothing happened. Something happened. How freaking dare you? So anyway, Darkseid's who killed Turpin, and so this storyline cemented him as the arch nemesis of the show. So, and isn't it in this episode? There's a shot of Luthor scowling at Darkseid on his computer screen that can see the street outside, and him like parading down the street with Superman like captured behind him. And Darkseid's just announcing, like, the Earth is mine, surrender now. And my interpretation of that scowl is, this is just another powerful alien threat to my power. Or, if you wanted to get more generous and deeper, another alien threat to the agency of the human race, which has always been the more interesting aspect of Luthor, that it's not about him being able to, or at least he doesn't necessarily think, it's about him having the freedom to take advantage of other people, but rather the freedom of anybody to do anything for themselves, which Superman, he sees as Superman taking it away from him. But that's not necessarily a feature of this Luthor, so I'd be more inclined for the first one. No, this is not the season finale. So the next episode, maybe I forgot about it pretty easy, because the season finale is actually Little Girl Lost, which introduces Supergirl, and that's also a two-parter. I had such a huge crush on Supergirl. Okay. So yeah, I was like, oh, Dan who? After it's done. So Clark finds her cryogenically frozen in Argo City again. So she gets her superhero start and has to rescue Superman in the climax. Admittedly, there's not a heck of a lot else to the episode, because, we're doing a girl, scaled down version of a Superman adventure. And otherwise, we're just kind of introducing her to the canon. But hey, the showrunners wanted this last in the season, so maybe there was a reason. Take that for what you will. And then season 3. There's really nothing much to season 3, except, like, she's also in the season 3 finale as well, though it's not much of a finale. And the reason for that, I said those last 3 episodes are not in season 3, but it might as well be the finale to season 3. And it was just, I do think it was just delayed. So, season 4 has the 3 episodes. One of them is whatever that I don't remember. The other 2 are the 2-parter Legacy. There was so much hype around this on TV. I had to rush in from a garage sale or a lemonade stand to make sure I caught this when it was on. And whichever one it was, I think I had to fight with my parents about it because they didn't understand. They didn't understand how momentous this was. So, okay, so Darkseid brainwashes Superman and uses him to attack Earth. This is the worst thing you can do to Superman. Trust of him takes a huge hit, and it's also kind of the catalyst for Justice League's major storylines. It's like a bomb went off, both for the DCAU and in my brain. It reverberated throughout the years to affect, I was going to say it was a couple of different things, but mostly affect my writing. I pulled from this episode when I first started writing in high school, and I didn't even realize it at the time. It was that embedded in my psyche. Just the whole prospect of an evil space dictator using someone brainwashed to attack Earth is something I totally did and didn't realize where it came from. God, there is so much quality about this series. But can I put it at S? Because the Daily Planet family is meh as a whole, because obviously you have Lois, who's great, but everyone else is meh, or less than meh. And like I said before, there are a lot of core Superman themes that the series doesn't address. And the animation can be awkward. Not awkward, but like weirdly slow at times, which was kind of a feature of the earlier rather than later DCAU, which kind of turns me off. This doesn't feel good, but none of it does S. So we're just going to have our first A and be done with it. So, yeah, I think that's going to do it for this video. Thanks for watching this one. If this was all you were interested in, that's fine. But if you'd like to check out the rest, I'd be much appreciative. And see you next for this guy.